On March 15, 1972, Francis Ford Coppola released The Godfather. It was immediately loved by critics and fans alike, breaking the mold of what the genre could be and becoming an era-defining film. Paramount dedicated a large budget for the movie, and it paid dividends. Last year, however, something very different happened. Coralie Farja pitched The Substance to Universal Studios, only to get shot down. The company did not want to risk a flop due to the extreme body horror that was depicted in the movie. The Substance was later acquired and released by Mubi, earning critical acclaim and is now up for multiple Oscars. On the other hand, Universal opted to release movies like Despicable Me 4 and Wicked, a sequel to a franchise that has run out of ideas but is still raking in cash, and an adaptation of a Broadway show. But why? Why are these amazing movie companies that used to produce masterpieces, genre-defining movies like Inception, Superbad, and The Pianist, all opting to instead slap the number 2 next to something they've already made? Why are original screenplays fading away? Here is a chart showing the top 20 highest grossing movies of 2024 and their respective global box office revenues as of January 2025. In this, we have some of the most popular movies of the year, like Inside Out 2, Moana 2, Dune Part 2, and Gladiator 2. Wait, Inside Out 2, Moana 2, Dune Part 2, Gladiator 2. All sequels. Let's take a closer look at the rest of the movies. Sequel, 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 adaptation, sequel, prequel, sequel, 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 original movie, prequel. 18 out of the 20 highest grossing movies are unoriginal ideas, either prequels, sequels, or adaptations. And if we take a look at the highest grossing movies of this decade, this trend only becomes more clear. Here are the 20 highest grossing movies since 2020. Let's go through the list again. Sequel, 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 sequel. Barbie is technically an adaptation of a toy, but for all intents and purposes, it's an original movie. Adaptation, sequel, 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 original movie, sequel, 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 reboot, sequel, sequel, sequel. Once again, 18 of the 20 movies on this list are unoriginal movies. Now you might be thinking, just because a movie is unoriginal doesn't mean it's a bad movie, and I would agree. In fact, some of the movies on this list are some of my favorite movies of the past few years, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Dune Part 2, and The Batman. But apart from some diamonds in the rough, these movies are not the same quality we've had years ago, and even more so, they're not on par with the original screenplays released alongside them. Here is a graph showing those top 20 highest grossing movies and their respective IMDb ratings. Not bad at first glance. There seems to be a positive correlation between ratings and revenue. Now let's overlay those highest grossing movies with a graph showing the top 20 highest rated movies and their respective revenues. The difference is staggering. Most of the highest rated movies of the decade don't even come close to the highest grossing movies of the decade. Everything Everywhere All at Once is ranked 18th in IMDb ratings. You want to know where it ranks on global revenue? All the way down here. 116th place. It only grossed $143 million worldwide, and that won the Oscar for Best Picture. The stark contrast between critical acclaim and box office success reveals a deeper truth about Hollywood's priorities. While high ratings suggest artistic merit and audience appreciation, they don't necessarily translate to massive profits. The highest grossing movies tend to be spectacle-driven, franchise-heavy blockbusters that appeal to the broadest possible audience. These films benefit from global brand recognition, massive marketing budgets, and wide theatrical releases, whereas smaller, critically acclaimed films often rely on word of mouth, niche audiences, and limited distribution. This also shows the risk-averse nature of modern studios. A24's Everything Everywhere All at Once became a cultural phenomenon, but it was still an independent film with a mid-sized budget of $25 million and a targeted release strategy. Compare that to Avatar: The Way of Water, which grossed over $2.3 billion worldwide. That film had a $460 million budget, years of marketing buildup, and the backing of a massive studio. Even with universal praise, an original film like Everything Everywhere simply doesn't have the same built-in audience or financial firepower. But this raises an even bigger question. If original, critically acclaimed films can be incredibly profitable, why don't they get the same massive budgets as franchise blockbusters? For a good example, let's take a look at Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is the third highest rated movie of the decade with a budget of $100 million. It grossed over $975 million, an 875% profit. That's a massive return. Now compare that to Avatar: The Way of Water, which had an estimated total cost of $460 million and brought in $2.3 billion worldwide. The raw numbers seem impressive, but when you break it down, 3 Oppenheimers would have cost less and made more profit than one Avatar sequel. So why are studios pouring hundreds of millions into safe blockbusters instead of funding more high-quality, high-profit films? Let me put it in a way that I, and likely many of you, are familiar with. Sports betting. With $10, you'd rather place a safe $15 bet versus a risky 9-leg parlay that could win you $1,500. Well, at least I'd hope you would.
If it's a good week for gambling, good week for sports, we eat a little better. If it's a little worse of a week, we may not eat.
And that's exactly how Hollywood sees these budgets. Comfort over risk. Security over ambition. If they don't win big, they might not eat. But does that always mean it's the right decision? The numbers tell a different story than Hollywood's spending habits. Let's take a look at the top 20 most profitable movies of the decade. Right away, one thing stands out. Most of these movies are original. Talk to Me, The Whale, Megan, Smile, Barbarian, all original films, all making over 900% profit. Compare that to the big budget franchise films, which often require $200+ million in funding before they even start marketing. But instead of betting on these lean, highly profitable movies, studios are funneling their biggest budgets into franchise blockbusters. Take a look at the top 20 highest budget movies. Now, the trend becomes obvious. Nearly every single one is a sequel, remake, or franchise entry. Studios are spending hundreds of millions on movies that don't always justify the cost, while original films that prove they can be massively profitable get a fraction of that funding. Now, let's put budget and profit side by side to see the bigger picture. Here's where things get interesting. The bigger the budget, the lower the profit margin. There's a clear negative trend between budget and profitability, meaning that more money doesn't necessarily guarantee a better return. Sure, something like Avatar: The Way of Water will still bring in billions, but it's also one of the riskiest financial bets in Hollywood history. If that movie had flopped, it could have sunk an entire studio. Meanwhile, a movie like Talk to Me, made for just $4.5 million, pulled in nearly 2,000% profit. If it had failed, the losses would have been a drop in the bucket compared to a $300+ million flop like The Flash or Fast 10. If original movies are proving to be more profitable on a percentage basis, and high-budget blockbusters carry massive financial risks, then why do studios continue prioritizing these expensive, franchise-driven films? The answer comes down to marketing, merchandising, and investor confidence. One of the biggest challenges original films face is getting people in seats. A Marvel movie, a Star Wars sequel, or even a Fast and Furious entry doesn't need to spend as much time convincing audiences to show up. The brand name does the work. Audiences already know the characters, the world, and what to expect, so marketing can focus on hype building rather than introduction. In contrast, an original movie has to do double the work. Not only does it have to introduce its story and characters, but it also has to convince audiences why they should care. This means that even though original movies are often more profitable in terms of return on investment, studios see them as higher risk ventures that require extensive marketing to break through. For studios, box office sales are only part of the equation. A blockbuster like The Little Mermaid or Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 doesn't just make money in theaters. It generates billions more in toy sales, licensing deals, theme park attractions, and streaming contracts. Even if a big budget movie barely breaks even theatrically, it can still be a long-term cash cow through merchandise and brand extensions. Compare that to something like Talk to Me or Barbarian, two highly profitable horror films that made huge returns, but don't have nearly the same long-term financial potential. Hollywood studios aren't just looking at immediate profitability, they're thinking about how many ways they can keep making money off a property for years to come. Hollywood studios are not just creative enterprises, they're massive corporate entities with shareholders and investors to answer to. And when it comes to corporate strategy, safe, predictable revenue streams always win over riskier but potentially more profitable ventures. A studio executive can confidently tell investors, "We're making another Marvel movie," and the response will be positive because Marvel has a proven track record. But pitching an original, high-budget film comes with uncertainty, and investors don't like uncertainty. This is why studios tend to greenlight franchise films, sequels, and reboots over original ideas. They're easier to justify from a financial standpoint, even if they don't always yield the biggest profit margins. Hollywood has a gambling problem. It's addicted to chasing the next big hit. Studio executives aren't just looking for movies that will make a decent profit, they're hunting for the next Avatar, the next Endgame, the next billion-dollar sensation. It's the Hollywood equivalent of doubling down at a casino table, hoping for a jackpot. They bet big on something familiar, assuming it will work just because it worked before. But more and more, these safe bets are proving to be far riskier than Hollywood thinks. And that's the irony of it all. In trying to avoid risk, studios are actually creating it. They're pouring hundreds of millions into movies that aren't guaranteed to succeed, while ignoring the very films that consistently prove to be high-return investments. Original movies aren't just an artistic necessity, they're one of the smartest financial moves a studio can make. So the question is, how long can Hollywood keep playing it safe before it collapses under its own weight? Because at the end of the day, a good movie will always be a good investment. Hollywood just has to stop being afraid to make one.